Learning with Lowell. Welcome,
everybody, to Learning with Lowell. Today we're joined with David Katz. Welcome to the show, David.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sweet. And David's out in Chicago, and he's got a conference coming up, which I'm going to attend. So if any stalkers out there, buy a ticket, and you can see me in person. But I think the first thing to talk about is programmed aging. So if we could start with the what, and then we can get into the how. But what is programmed aging?
Yeah, so it's the hypothesis that aging is active self-destruction, that the body is not trying its best to survive. We age for the same reason that we go through puberty. Our bodies have a clock, and the clock says it's time to go through puberty, and it starts the active puberty program. And our bodies also have a clock, and it says it's time to age, and it starts the active aging program. So it's in stark contrast to the mainstream hypothesis that aging is the result of some accumulation of damage. So whereas those research programs are trying to clear and classify damage, the aging as active self-destruction, the programmed aging hypothesis, suggests that we figure out how the clock works and try to turn back the clock.
Are you familiar with Michael Levin's work at all?
A little bit, yes.
Is there any? It feels kind of similar to his, where in that, like, it's not like he's doing much to the cells. He's almost like getting the cells to do what they want to do originally, to regenerate something. It kind of feels like there's something like corollary there.
Yeah, like he believes that the cells have abilities that they can activate if they receive the right external signals, but they're not doing this already. So I also believe that. I think the cells can be young. There's no reason why an old cell can't be young. It's not like it doesn't have the ability, and if we give it the right external signals, it will be young. I agree with this.
Do you think there's I think there's like telomerase that decodes, like that shortens over time, because like copies of copies. Do you think there's something to that in aging?
Yeah, so the telomeres do shorten. It used to be a very hot field, and I'm looking for something like that. That would be a clear mechanism for how the cell knows how old it is. It keeps track of the length of the telomeres. But we've actually grown mice with twice as long telomeres, and they still die right on time. So it does change with age. You can look at the telomeres and tell how many times a mitotic cell has undergone division.
At any point in this conversation, if you find value in it, please subscribe. It is hugely beneficial, and it tells Google and everyone out there that this is content worth watching. Thank you for everyone thus far who has commented, liked, subscribed, and told their friends.
But it's not actually directing biological pathways, certainly not directing the biological pathways involved in aging, in my opinion. But, that's a great example that every one of your cells has telomerase. Telomerase is active in your stem cells, and they could choose to activate telomerase and regrow the telomeres if they wanted to. So whatever people look at and consider damage, the cell has the ability to repair this damage if it wants to, is what is my hypothesis.
Yeah, it comes to this question that I asked Michael Levin, where I asked him, why is it that cancer can be immortal, but the cells around it can't? He was like, well, you have that backwards. Why is it that the cells aren't immortal? And, it's like the cancers are almost going back to what the cells really are if they don't have all these other functions keeping them down. It's the way I paraphrase it in my head, which I think leads credence to your hypothesis, where it's like the system is making it so we age. It's not like, I think if with the right system or technology put in place, you could stop that from happening.
Yeah, they have the ability. They have the ability to be immortal. They have the ability to do a lot of things. Yeah, it's amazing. They choose to work, well within the organism.
I think there's a jellyfish or something outside of Australia where it really goes back in time, where it starts as like an adult jellyfish and it goes back to being like a little pod jellyfish, or where the heck the stages. Anyone who's in the comments who knows what I'm talking about, please. But and then it goes back.
Tornii.
You know exactly what I'm talking about? Okay, sweet. This is helpful.
Yeah, well, it has like a cyclical life stage.
Yeah.
It goes from a medusa back to the polyp to the medusa to the polyp. It's unclear if I consider that. I'm not sure whether to consider that reversing aging or, that's just its form of reproduction. But yeah, there's so many different, schedules of aging, and evolution really can do whatever it wants. There's really no reason we have to die when we do. No law of biology that says we have to age.
Mhm. Well, I wonder if there's like there's a great sci-fi series called The Hamilton. It's a Hamilton by Hamilton or whatever. I'm gonna have to look this up 1 second. Um, the sci-fi series where like in the series basically people would get into tanks every now and again and it'll rejuvenate their body and like they can make augmentations to it. So which reminds me of like the butterflies. When butterflies are basically liquefying their bodies, their brain stays intact and they remember the memories of when they were like a little caterpillar. I wonder if like that's what eventually we're going to be like when it comes to like having a functional immortality, where it's like the body will go under some type of process that we induce, and then it's set back to factory, or maybe you just keep it at factory set, and then we just kind of keep living as long as we don't get hit by a truck.
Yeah, I hope so. Oh, what did you say? They retain their memories, the
Yeah,
butterflies?
yeah,
Huh, I have to look that up. Very interesting.
yeah. I was reading an article on it like Tuesday, and it was like, oh, that's neat. I was like, why the brain? You know, but I guess it makes sense. Like all that life, you wouldn't want to jettison that. That's pretty useful information.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but how do you see it working? Or like, if like we're skipping a couple steps here in terms of like explaining what your your hypothesis is, but in terms of like it in practice, from what you're saying, like how would it be like to you if your hypothesis was like tested out and we had therapies and stuff? What would those therapies actually look like?
Yeah, so if we did find how the body is keeping track of time, it's a clear therapeutic target. So we'll have to go in and turn back the clock, trick the body, trick each one of your cells into being younger. So if it's a gene level, then that means, we need some type of gene therapy to go in and slightly modify your genes.
Do you think the FDA is gonna, by the point that you've proven it out, do you think the FDA is gonna be at the point where they consider aging to be a disease, or are you gonna have to do what all other aging therapies are doing, which is like they're targeting cancer or something, and then it has the byproduct like, yeah, it will probably affect aging at the same time.
Yeah, hopefully they recognize aging as a disease. Yeah, I mean, that is one of the hurdles. But there's other countries we could do it in. We just need to, yeah, part of the reason I'm having this conference is to promote this idea that aging is a disease. It should be treated. Saying something is a disease is really a political statement. So
Hmm.
society should prioritize finding a cure. We shouldn't just view it as natural and inevitable. We should prioritize finding a cure. And the FDA could help us. Once they classify as a disease, then we can, they can approve therapeutics specifically for aging. We wouldn't have to, use therapeutics meant for other things, as you were saying.
Yeah. I think there's an inverse example of this where it's like if something's labeled as disease, it's made like negative. A professor of mine was saying that in like the 70s when they delisted homosexuality as a mental illness. Apparently, then around that time, like a lot of good stuff happened. So apparently, if you don't consider people, as an illness, like it usually goes pretty nicely. So as an inverse example of proper labeling, I think you gotta
It's a
yeah
great example of how these things are really political.
yeah.
That's right. Even it's funny because most biology professors even would not consider it disease. They object when I say it's a disease. Yeah, so the conference is about programmed aging, but really just for the layman, just for most biologists, it's just about promoting this idea that we should cure aging as if it were a disease. Treat it like a disease and find a cure. Even that's very objectionable. But even the people that agree with me on that, then they also disagree on whether the body is trying its best to survive.
Yeah, that was a big thing. When we had like a back and forth, and you said one thing that you wanted to get people to think about is I'm going to quote you, and hopefully you were cool with me quoting you. But
Yep.
you want to offer a small change in people's worldview that they should be working against their bodies, not with their bodies, which is a huge change in people's behaviors, which is very weird. How would that actually look? Like, how does that actually look?
Yeah, we should try to develop therapeutics that break things down and interfere with pathways
Mm.
rather than develop therapeutics that clear damage. So the body is destroying itself is the hypothesis. So we have to develop therapies to work against it, not work with it. It's a real big, change in mindset, especially when you're developing therapeutics.
Is there I think one of the big things for longevity and health is like I forget the name off the top of my head, but Michael Ray was telling me about it, where it's restrictive diet. Like you don't eat like a very narrow amount of time, and then you fast for a large amount of time. I wonder if the reason that works from your point of view, your hypothesis point of view, is the body doesn't have the energy to break stuff down.
No, it's actually usually people that believe in programmed aging, caloric restriction is what convinced them. Yeah, if I maybe I'll show you my slides in a second. It's in my slides. It shows you that right. We have these mice in the lab. Here's the level that we feed them, and they starve to death. And we go just above that level, and we see massive extension of lifespan. And this is very surprising to people that think the body is trying its best to survive, because anything the body can do with limited resources, it could do with plentiful resources. However, what they do not realize is that the body is not trying its best to survive. It's holding all of these abilities in reserve, and it does not activate these longevity pathways unless you trick it into thinking it's in an adverse environment. Yeah, so it's caloric restriction, is the number one thing. It's the number one method of life extension, and it's the number one thing that points to programmed aging. Aging is programmed, built into our bodies, selected for by evolution for the good of the species, but it's detrimental to the individual.
This reminds me of the book The Selfish Gene, how like basically we're just like DNA, like this whole purpose of like biology is DNA, which is like kind of sucks, all the brain and all those other things to be attached onto it. Do you ascribe to that as well, or what do you think the purpose of? Yeah.
Highly against Dawkins' book, Selfish Gene. Unfortunately, that book that's the mainstream, this neo-Darwinism. You're not allowed, I don't know if you know, you're not allowed to publish any theory of evolution where the unit of evolution is higher than the gene. It's considered discredited. But one thing I'm trying to promote with this conference is that, these models that say that the unit of evolution has to be the gene are, complete nonsense. They're developed decades ago, even before we knew about alternative splicing. It's not even clear evolution can even see the gene. So it's really ridiculous to say the gene is the only unit of evolution. Yeah, so aging doesn't make sense. So Dawkins' view of the universe is that our bodies are just survival machines built by our genes, and their goal is to propagate. And aging doesn't really make sense from that perspective. So why would evolution not select for longevity? Actually, maybe it'd be a good time. I'm going to share my screen because this leads into my first slide.
The comment section seems to really be enjoying slides. For the people listening in, I will do better, because I've gotten comments there too. I'll do better in describing what's going on. So we're looking at slides right now.
All right, so we'll start with
it's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I have a conference I'm promoting, the Curing Aging Conference, Curing Aging 2024. The website is curingaging.com. But I also have this YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@curingaging. So I have these, I make animated videos on programmed aging. And so I have examples from my animated videos. So we start with the big question. Why do we age? The biggest open question in biology. So I'll just start off by defining what is aging. Aging is the increasing probability of death from internal causes. And now many plants and some animals do not age. So it's a big mystery. Why do we have to age? The sequoia trees, this first image in the left here is in the sequoia trees, and these trees just get stronger and hardier with each passing year for thousands and thousands of years. They do not age. The probability of death does not increase. And it's not just plants that do this. Many animals, many reptiles, like many species of turtles, also do not age. And there's no law of biology that says organisms have to age. So it's a real mystery. Why do they age? And many biologists in the past have thought about this question. And the first answer they came up with was that animals in the wild don't age. Animals don't age. And this is completely wrong. Unfortunately, a lot of people still say it. Here's, the Kirkwood et al. 2000 Nature paper that, was talking about. This is the hypothesis called evolution's shadow or selection shadow. So this is a survival curve. You get a group of organisms at one point in time, and then you follow them over time. So at time point 0, time is the x-axis, and the percent alive is the y-axis. It's called a survival curve. So at time point 0, 100% are alive, and as time goes on, the organisms, the same fixed population of organisms, start dying, and so the percent alive starts going down. So this red one here, that's aging, right? That means they're increasing probability of death with the passage of time. You're more likely to die if you're chronologically older. Death comes to the chronologically old disproportionately. This is how you determine if your population is aging. The gold standard is if you have this concave downward survival curve. So the hypothesis of selection shadow is that in the wild, survival curves look like this black line with green under it. That's non-aging. And so even people as smart as Kirkwood thought that in the wild, animals, they just really assumed based on nothing, that animals in the wild don't age. And they don't age because they die. They view, nature as red in tooth and claw. And, it's a vicious dog eat dog world. And they die due to animals in the wild die due to external mortality, and they never reach old age, and therefore evolution never had the ability to select for longevity. That's why they call this hypothesis selection's shadow. But this is just wrong. People, they might watch nature documentaries and it might be very memorable to them to see one animal tear apart another animal, but this is really not a representation of what happens in nature. Animals in the wild age. It's the number one cause of death in the wild. And we have over 100 years of field evidence now to show that survival curves in the wild look like this red line, or they look like this image here. These are called type 1 survival curves. So mammals in general have type 1 survival curves, this concave downward line. And this is in textbooks now. So this used to be a debate, but now if you look in any textbook, it will say most mammals have these concave down survival curves. So I know a lot of professors still say it doesn't happen, but it's clear that they, received their degrees decades ago before this was now solidly in every textbook. And this picture.
Can I interject with just a quick question?
No,
is there any significance between so on the images that we're seeing, on the far left, there's a black and white one that has type 1, type 2, and type 3. And the type 1 is like, looks like all mammals. The middle one looks like avian creatures. And then the bottom one looks like some stuff that lives in the sea. Is there any significance between the different types that we've seen in the data? Or is it just the labeling of it and how it works out for the populations?
Yeah, people debate the correlations. Why do so many, as you said, creatures that live in the sea have this type 3? Type 3 is like non-aging, right? They get less likely to die as they get chronologically older. I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, some mammals are type 3 too. So, and a lot of fish are type 1. Yeah, whales, naked mole rats, much closer to humans. They're type 3. So no one has a good explanation. People try to find correlations, but for every correlations, there's so many exceptions, which really makes you wonder if this correlation is valid at all. We don't really know. Why does one organism have a short lifespan and another very similar organism have a drastically different lifespan with a different survival curve? We don't really know. Each organ, but I mean, it happens in our body too, right? This cell has, one function with, this life course, and a very similar cell has a completely different function. So it all has to do, in my opinion, about the organism's role in its ecosystem.
Okay.
Yeah, and this image on the right is a picture of Peter Litsky's talk from last year's Curing Aging conference. So he started out by defining aging, just like I'm doing now, and showing that it does happen in the wild. So this is just a fact. Over 100 years of field evidence, aging happens in the wild. So now we have this big question. Why do we age? And this is another unfortunate thing that, in fact, just this week, I had a Harvard professor I spoke to said this. He said, we age because once you procreate, you yourself are useless baggage. And so there's no incentive for evolution to keep you healthy. However, this is just illogical. I mean, obviously, if you had extended longevity, you would have the opportunity to have orders of magnitude more children, and you could help your progeny for a significantly longer time. So there should be tremendous amount of pressures to govern your reproductive rates and your longevity, because that's directly related to your reproductive fitness. So you're not useless baggage once you have children. I mean, it's just an illogical statement. And unfortunately, a lot of professors will still say that. So why do we age? Number one cause of death in the wild. There's clearly evolution has the ability to select for longevity, and there's a lot of evolutionary pressure around your lifespan. So why did it select for aging? And the mainstream answer now is a trade-off theory of aging, that there is some fundamental trade-off between longevity and something else. So I'm representing this idea in this image here with like a balance. Like this is called the disposable soma theory of aging, that there's a fundamental trade-off between longevity and fertility, that evolution cannot select for longevity without hurting the organism's fertility somehow. And there's been absolutely no evidence for this theory, in my opinion. I mean, if you're going to make a trade-off theory, the burden of proof is on you to show that there is trade-offs. The evidence that they usually present are, oh, this gene is involved in fertility and it's involved in aging pathways. But the definitive evidence against trade-off theories, in my opinion, is the broad diversity of aging schedules in nature. We have one organism, just like we have this bat here, that's a very short-lived bat species that lives 10 years, and then you have a very similar long-lived bat species. Why? So if there were some trade-off between longevity and something else, preventing the short-lived bat species from a longer lifespan, then how did the long-lived bat species overcome this trade-off? Clearly, the long-lived bat species easily overcame this trade-off. So evolution has the ability to overcome this trade-off, and thus there really is no trade-off after all.
Are we able to induce a trade-off? I'm thinking of like Phineas Gage and how we understand many properties of the brain, where it's like we deliberately break it, or we found something broken in it. We're like, oh well, hippocampus probably has something to do with memory, or this part of the brain probably has something to do with the personality, because people like Phineas Gage that had like their brains messed up. And because we have all this, genetic engineering and stuff going on, is it possible to induce examples of trade-off into an organism that's like short-lived or whatever, to see if it'll modify its longevity?
Yeah, good question. You're saying like we damage part of the brain, then we say, oh, that has to do with speech because he can't talk now that we damaged it.
Yeah.
How would we do that for aging? Well, you can start knocking out genes. And if there is a trade-off, I guess, the organism would live longer, but then he wouldn't be able to regenerate skin, or he wouldn't be able to have babies. So if there is a trade-off, then I guess that would be some evidence. Knock out a gene, you get longevity at the expense of something else. But again, there's no evidence that that is the case. And in fact, you can always breed organisms for increased fertility and increased longevity, increased strength and increased longevity. Disposable soma theory I mentioned is this idea that there's somehow a trade-off between having babies and longevity. And so evolution has to choose between them. But when we talked about caloric restriction, right? When you have less calories, that's when you live longest. So it's the trade-off theories say if you give the body more, then it could give both sides of the trade-off more. But no, it's actually with less the body does best.
Do you think that explains why? I think for the most part, we've kind of like capped out on human aging right now. For the last like 100 years, it's basically capped out like 74, I think, 72 for men. And women are great; they get an extra like 10 years or something like that. But it really hasn't stretched beyond that. And we have this abundance of food, so we're like basically with your hypothesis, maybe it's like supercharging our aging and making
We're
us like
aging
die sooner.
faster than they used to.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, due to the comfort of our lives. That's exactly right. I do believe that.
Hmm. Is there research that's been done to like show that correlative, or it just makes sense?
Yeah, so David St Clair is really good. He talks about this a lot, and I 100% agree with him. Yeah, so I would refer you to David St Clair talking about this. It's funny, he was just on Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast where he mentioned this.
Yeah, well, if I'll give like a little short where we challenge him to come on the show and talk about this more. Well, it's one of those things where if we say something really incendiary, it'll go far. But we're pretty like mellow on this, this show. Like no one ever really says anything that incendiary, so I can't do that. Are there more slides?
Yes.
Sweet.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt or say anything you want, move it in any direction, but I'll keep going with the slides.
Yeah. Well, I have another question. Is if there's no trade off and more time is more opportunity, why isn't there more organisms that don't age or like age slower than? Because yeah.
Evolution has consistently selected for aging. Yeah, aging is
Yeah.
the rule, not only for organisms, but I think it's built into every one of our cells. So yeah, you're right. Some weird examples, like here's the naked mole rat, here's what the survival curve looks like for the naked mole rat. It doesn't age, but most other mice and rats, most other rodents do age. This is what their survival curve looks like. So, and the rate of aging and the shape of the survival curve are finely tuned by evolution due to the specifics of that species and its ecosystem. And actually, Shelley Buffenstein, who discovered that the naked mole rats don't age, is speaking at the Curing Aging Conference on June 22nd in, a little less than 2 months now. So that we're, lucky to have them. And
Cool last name.
Yep. You're asking why, again, you have this perspective that the purpose of the body is to spread its genes, but that's actually not, I do not. The standard biologist would say, what's the dream of every cell is to become two cells. But this is not what we see in nature. The dream of every cell, in my opinion, is to die right on time. 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8. This is exponential growth. This is the fundamental problem of replicating life. This is the problem that evolution was worried about. Okay, it wasn't so worried about how to make 1, 2. It was worried about once we make 1, 2, how are we going to stop exponential population growth, leading to a consumption of all resources and everyone dying at once. That's why it made aging, and it programmed aging deep into every cell. I look at a cell and I think it's a machine designed to die right on time. So it hasn't selected it more because it's actually very bad for the ecosystem if organisms don't age, right? If you have the ecosystem has to remain robust to various changing environments. It can't allow any one species to undergo unmitigated, unconstrained population growth. That's my answer. So it's
yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I have two follow-up questions.
Yep. Yeah, please.
No, I really liked everything you're saying. So one thing, it sounds like, well, apoptosis is in many ways the like stopping cancer. So I'm wondering if aging is a byproduct of the body not wanting cancer to happen.
It's similar to apoptosis is programmed cell death, and I think aging is programmed self-destruction. Yeah, just like apoptosis kills the cell, aging kills the organism, but it's not for the good of the organism to stop cancer. Your body can not have, unconstrained apoptosis and not have cancer. Your body cannot have cancer indefinitely. The same risk of cancer that the 20-year-old body has, your body can maintain that indefinitely. It chooses not to for the good of the ecosystem, what I'm saying.
Hmm. What are the implications of that, given that we're an 8 billion member species that rules and affects the ecology of the planet so significantly?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen, the problems of exponential population growth. It's, we're nowhere near, I think, the carrying capacity, but if we keep going, if we don't age, yeah, we'll get to the carrying capacity, we'll consume all the resources, and it's going to be a big problem for the ecosystem when we are dominating. Perhaps, there's a good argument that we are actually dominating the ecosystem. So, this is not what evolution wants, in my opinion. It doesn't want any one population to dominate the ecosystem so drastically, right? If something happens to humans, right? If humans get in a war or something, they can disrupt everything.
Wouldn't is So my view of evolution is it's like an individual species thing. You're kind of describing it
I'm
as like an
saying no.
ecological thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, Richard Dawkins, the mainstream, they think it's not they think it's a gene thing. They think the gene is the unit of evolution.
Hmm.
Evolution is moving in direction that increases the prevalence of genes. I'm saying it actually acts on a much higher level. It is acting on a gene level, clearly, but as you said, the individual and the population, the species, and even the ecosystem, these are all whole units of evolution.
Hmm. Is it kind of like when a large organism gets stuck on an island, they slowly shrink down over time? The environment is making large organisms smaller.
Is that known to be true? I didn't know about that.
Yeah. There's a race of humans called oh man, what are they called? I think they're called pygmies or something. They're in Southeast Asia. They were really small, and then they had like elephants got really small too. They had
Ah,
some like
interesting.
bears that got really small. It's
It fits in. And no, that fits in, right? It doesn't want your ecosystem shrank, and so you're going to shrink because it doesn't want you to dominate the ecosystem. I like that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is like instead of it being a singular variable of like maximizing the potential for DNA to continue propagating, you're saying it's a multivariable equation. How does that multivariable equation happen? So like with DNA, it's like makes sense, right? Like two people have sex, and then stuff happens, like mutations. Then that's how you speciate. So how would the multivariable equation come into like making a species stronger and regulating the species then?
What is the mechanism of group selection? Yeah, this is the main reason why it's rejected by the mainstream. The mainstream doesn't. I mean, it is kind of magical thinking to believe in something if you don't have a mechanism. I mean, we know gene selection is happening, and we know the
Hmm.
mechanism by which the genes are passed on, right? And we know the mechanism is natural selection. That's how the genes get selected for. So we understand the mechanism of gene selection, and we do not know. So I do not know the mechanism of group selection. I mean, population extinction could be one mechanism, but that's, very slow acting, granted. But just look around. Aging. They can't explain aging, and that's my best evidence for it's happening. I think it's clearly happening. Group selection is happening, and I don't know the mechanism.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the for the environmental factor, definitely look into I think it's called the dwarfism. If you have Google in front of you, I don't know, but if you were to Google animals that get smaller on small islands, I think that's like there's a term for this. In the comment section, I guarantee there's two people. Please make fun of me for not knowing this. I should know the name. But yeah, that happens. So I think there's some evidence out in the wild for what you're saying.
No, but I don't doubt it at all. I mean, it makes sense if you change the environment, the species will move in a different direction.
Yes. And then species. Now I'm doing it. Smaller on small islands. Um, it's called island rule. It describes the tendency of large mammals to shrink to to shrink while smaller mammals become larger. Oh, that's
Ah,
interesting. I thought it was just larger becomes smaller, but it's also smaller become larger. So like kind of like swaps. That's kind of cool.
I'm
Hmm.
not sure why smaller animals would become larger.
Well, I think Komodo dragons are an example of a smaller animal getting
I
bigger.
guess because they have no competitors. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, for anyone who's an expert on this, come on, feel free to come on the show. All right, so mole rats and rat.
Yeah, so these are just two different types of aging schedules, and the hypothesis is that evolution selects for these different types of rates of aging based on the ecosystem. So the theory is that aging is built into our bodies. And all the best methods of life extension, caloric restriction, young blood transfusions, strenuous exercise, castration, knocking out certain genes, these all involve interfering with the body's active pathways, not by clearing damage. So, this is the weight of scientific evidence is leaning towards the theory that the body is not trying its best to survive, that aging is active self destruction. And so I'm going to discuss some of this evidence here.
Wait,
Uh,
did you say castration? So if
yes,
people who
yeah,
are castrated live longer?
I'm not recommending it, but it is a fact. Yeah,
Wow, like how
you
much
can.
longer?
Um, uh, it works in worms, flies, mice,
Can,
and men. Yeah, so it's not as good as caloric restriction, which I think in the best case gives you like 50% extension. Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly, but gives you less than 50% extension. I think it's number three. So it's caloric restriction, then young blood transfusions, and then castration in general. But
yeah.
it depends on the species, of course. But yeah,
Is
it's
it? Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
no, yeah, you go.
Well, it's the second time. If I do it again, yell at me, please.
Okay.
Is it like literal castration, or could it be just chemical castration? Like how like far down the line do you have to go for this?
Yeah, so I think it's literal castration, like removing the testes.
Well, Bryan Johnson, if he's listening in,
You should
there's
ask
another
them.
variable to work with.
I mean, the point is not to castrate yourself. The point is to realize that every method, all the top methods of life extension involve interfering with the body, not by clearing damage, right? If aging was just an accumulation of damage, there's no reason why castration would lead to life extension. However, if aging is all about the signals and your body sending self-destruct signals, then castration interferes with all these signaling pathways, and that leads to less aging.
Yeah, and I think it's just like a testosterone thing that makes people really aggressive. So I feel like if you remove testosterone, people would be more mellow and they wouldn't like cause problems. Which
Well,
is like
even if
yeah, just
it's
more of a
not,
joke of observation than anything.
uh, yeah, I mean, women live longer, and it's not because men engage in more dangerous activity. Even when you account for that, they
Oh,
literally,
really?
yeah, women live longer. Yeah, they age. Men and women age at different rates, and I think that's
Yeah.
more evidence that it's programmed. Anything, this is. I'm not. I've only been thinking about this a while, so I'm not sure if this is valid, but I think I like to use that as a rule. If something affects men and women differently, it's programmed. Like
Yeah.
allergies, clearly immune conditions, men and women usually get affected by these immune conditions very differently. And so if the body's doing it to itself, you should expect it. Or if there's a drastic difference in the prevalence in men and women, then the body's doing it to itself. And aging, there's a very different rate of aging between men and women. And I
Yeah.
like to use that as evidence that the body is doing it to itself.
Is there maybe this will be later in what you're showing us, but is there an actual like mechanism that you can see like on a chemical level that's happening in the cells or happening all over that you can like see? And I just imagine like you could like freeze or like go in and like intercept it to stop these things from happening. Are there like a
Mechanism by
actual
which
yeah
men age faster, or
no
mechanism of
like
aging in general?
the mechanisms that like that you can tie to the body basically working against itself.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for the clock.
Yeah.
I don't know the mechanism of the clock, and I
Hmm.
certainly don't know the mechanism of the aging. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, whatever it's doing, I think it's using the blood. I mean, why young blood makes you young. I'll talk about that as well. So I think the cells are communicating and they're sending signals through the circulatory system, and then they're aging,
Mm.
sending
Right.
pro-aging signals.
Make it really easy to make an intervention then. All you
Yes,
have to do is just
yeah.
induce the blood.
That's exactly right. Well, this theory that aging is programmed self-destruction, another reason why people reject it is they view it as, childishly optimistic. Why do they view it as so optimistic? Because there's a clear therapeutic target if this theory is true, and that is the clock. There must be some mechanism by which the body is keeping track of time. It has to know, oh, it's time to go through puberty, start the puberty program, and it has to know it's time to be old, start the aging program. So there must be a clock, and it's a clear target for therapeutics. And it's also very optimistic because I look at an old body and I don't see a body that's worn out. I don't see a body that's accumulated damage like the mainstream does. I see a body that is functioning quite well. Just look how well it's running the aging program.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're going to be surprised to know that the mainstream biology does not believe in long-term clocks. Even though we all go through puberty right on time, they do not believe the body knows how old it is. But I think
It's
there's
interesting.
clear evidence. And people that, don't study biology are often shocked to realize that biologists they're not even looking for long-term timing mechanisms, but because they do not think they exist. Again, because they're very skeptical. And since, we haven't found one yet, and so they think it doesn't exist. But I think it clearly does exist, and we should be looking for it. And that's actually what I'm doing now, trying to
Hmm.
find long-term clocks because that's the clear target for therapeutics. And so, well, first of all, it's well established that each one of your cells has a circadian oscillator. So there's a transcription translation feedback loop by which the cell knows what time of day it is. And it's very important. Like the lethal dosages of drugs are drastically different in mice per day and night. So, the body's, biological pathways respond very differently on day and night. So each cell, your body knows what time of day it is, and each cell knows what time of day it is. And this is completely endogenous, doesn't matter on external cues at all.
Hmm.
And the body, certainly in mammals, the body knows what time of year it is. And so I have evidence for this here. This is called a circannual clock, not a circadian. It's 24-hour. Circannual is a yearly clock. I'm using here this image of male European hamsters. They hibernate in the winter. Hibernation's this period of inactivity. They'll curl up in a ball and but in remain inactive for days sometimes. And even if they leave their nest, that they will be much less active. But it's not just a change in behavior. This is actual biological change. And so this graph, you can see that during the hibernation season, their body temperature actually goes down and they're not eating as much. So their body weight goes down. And then when they are no longer hibernating, their body temperature goes back to normal, and actually their size of their testes also increases. And this is completely endogenous. So in this study, they removed all external cues. So it's not that they're keeping track of the length, the amount of daylight. It's not like it's induced by the temperature. This is completely endogenous. So the body clearly knows what time of year it is. It has a year-long oscillator. And here's
At the
just another.
no, you're supposed to yell at me.
Yeah,
But
no, please. I want to encourage you if you have any
yeah,
questions.
the I recently read that squirrels when it's spring, their brains get bigger by 20%, so they can remember. And the idea is that it's to remember where they put all the nuts.
Huh, I've never heard that, but yeah, wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I have this next image is about female squirrels. And
Hmm.
this is just another example. They're kept in constant conditions. So this is when they were kept in the dark. So each row right here is a day, and they have it's an actogram. So they have a wheel in their cage, and if they run on the wheel, that time period becomes dark. And so you can see they're in the dark, they're presumably sleeping, and then when they wake up, they run on their wheel and they get less active, and then they go to sleep. And they do this except when it's time to hibernate. And again, constant conditions, constant temperature, constant diet. So everything's kept constant. They're not taking external cues. They still know it's time to hibernate. And you can see this from their actograms. So I'm using this as evidence. And this is actually, everyone agrees that the body has year-long oscillators. So everyone agrees there's 24-hour oscillators, even, ultradian oscillators. They have year-long oscillators. But then now I'm saying it has long-term oscillators. The body knows how old it is, just how it times puberty. It's also timing the aging program, and that is highly controversial.
Hmm. It's interesting, but from what you're saying, it sounds like that makes sense. Like puberty happens at a certain time. It's been getting faster because people think that we have better diets now. They think it's like tied to like weight or something that causes puberty. But these things happen like pretty uniform times. It's not like people go through menopause when they're like 17 and stuff. Like there's usually like a formula to these things.
It's clearly timed. Yeah. It's shocking that the mainstream is not looking for what triggers puberty. They don't think there are clocks because they don't think it's relevant, to treating conditions of aging. But it is very relevant, in my opinion. And you're right. You get earlier puberty, the more comfortable your lifestyle is.
Yeah.
More evidence that if your body's not trying its best to survive, it extends your life if you put yourself in adverse environments. Yeah, and that leads us into this next. This is usually what convinces people. It's what convinced me. It's what convinced Josh Middledorf. This is a slide from the first iteration of the Curing Aging Conference. This is Josh Middledorf speaking. And his epiphany, I guess, was in 1996, was when he learned about Weindrich et al. 1986, famous study on caloric restriction. When you feed the rodents less, they live longer. And that's really what convinced me as well. And so here's the study from Weindrich in 1986. They have different regimens of caloric restriction. So here's the normal survival curve when they're allowed to eat as much as they want, but then they have different regimens of caloric restriction and they live longer. So this was actually known before Weindrich, but he popularized this. And this started, in the longevity community. People restrict calories. And I'm not saying that you should do that, but this is clear evidence that your body is not trying its best to survive. Anything your body can do with limited resources, it could do with plentiful resources, but it's choosing not to. So we should develop therapeutics that work against the body, not with the body. And again, this is a very controversial hypothesis, but only when it comes to humans. Semmelper's organisms that die immediately after reproduction, everyone agrees that their bodies are not trying their best to survive. Everyone agrees, for example, in octopuses, aging and sudden death in octopuses is the result of active self-destruction pathways. So these are female octopuses. Day 0 is when they lay their eggs and they stop eating once they lay their eggs. That's why body weight is on the y-axis, and so their body weight goes down, but they don't die of starvation. They can live in starvation a lot longer than 40 days, but 40 days after the female lays her eggs hatch, and the female octopus dies. So each line is an octopus, and when the line stops, the octopus is dead. And again, this 0 is when it laid its eggs. But there's 2 regions of the octopus's brain called the optic glands. Nothing to do with their eyes, but they're next to their eyes. So they're called the optic gland. And if you remove those optic glands, that's what you get up here. They lay their eggs and they have tremendous extension of life. So their body no longer destroys itself. You just remove a region of the brain, thus proving that the body of an octopus is not trying its best to survive. And the octopus didn't die here. This is just when the study stopped. So yeah, no one, it shows you that, there's really a dearth of aging research. No one even knows how long octopuses can live for. These are female octopuses. No one knows what kills male octopuses. No one knows no one knows how long male octopuses live. No one knows the cause of death of anything, basically, in general. So there's incredible dearth of aging research because people don't realize that this is a problem society should prioritize. And everyone recognizes that in smell-first organisms that die right after reproduction, aging is self-destruction. And I'm arguing that even in mammals and many other organisms, aging is also active self-destruction. This proves that evolution can select for it, and I believe evolution selected for it in humans as well.
It's wild.
Yeah, it is. It's very neat, very interesting.
It's the Phidias gauge of the animal world for you. They're moving to the gland, the destruction of something, and knowing what the brain does in response to it. Just the removing of the gland. It's kind of your example of like the prefrontal cortex is to do something with the personality.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I don't think it's as easy as removing something in the brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, it could be. Maybe it is.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Oh, just it's a neat example with that parallel.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Here's another example you might like. If you put a cast on a mouse's leg, the muscle will deteriorate. It happens in humans too. Cast the leg, the muscle deteriorates, and these are active pathways. So this paper, Say-Check et al., 2006, was able to characterize this, and ATF4 is one of these genes activated when you put a cast on a mouse's leg. And now what happens if you knock out ATF4? Oh, you also lose muscle mass when you age, right? And I'm trying to show you that that's also an active process. It's not an accumulation of damage. This is an active process of self-destruction. So if you knock out ATF4, then the mouse does not lose muscle mass when you cast him. And if you look at this study, Matthew Miller et al., 2023, the mice do not lose muscle mass with aging if you knock out ATF4. So you intervene, you knock out a gene, they not only survive, but they do better. So it shows you that the body is not trying its best to survive, that we age, we get more likely to die because of active chemical pathways.
That was really recent. I was just thinking, with that type of result, people could develop something from that. Mainly because I was looking at the 2006 one, but 2023, they wouldn't have time to develop that into some type of therapy.
They're not even trying. They don't even believe aging is active self-destruction. They don't believe you should cure aging. Yeah, all these people who's, I'm always excited to read these studies, and I go talk to them. I'm always shocked. You see, your whole life, this lad's whole life is knocking out ATF4 and seeing the great benefits you get. So why don't they believe aging is active self-destruction? I don't know.
So they have no, mission or whatever to take this research. I could see it as like, hey, you got an accident, like, hey, we're gonna give you this pill or this thing that you're gonna take in conjunction for the next couple of weeks, so that when you get out of this, you just walk off, completely remove physical therapy for the most part. They have no interest in like developing that further. It just seems like such a low bar.
They do. It's funny that this lab has like some well, I don't know, or they have like some supplement that it clearly doesn't do anything. Their research suggests gene therapy, and no one wants to start doing that. So, yeah, it's unfortunate. But
well, someone listen in. Yeah, we got to license that IP and develop it, because that'd save a lot of pain and suffering. I was in a physical therapist, office once, or not office, like the little gym thing they have, and there's a bunch of kids, and they were screaming their heads off because like they got their their legs were broken, and they're finally doing the physical therapy, and it's really painful to go through physical therapy, and that the parents had to sit there and be like, it's gonna hurt, but it's okay, and then they were like crying, and even the physical therapist was like, it's really not that bad, but it is bad. You just gotta kind of have to get through it, and it was really hard, especially on kids that like they don't know, they don't have like the frame of reference to know like that some pain is good, like if you just like get through it, it's like this is like their whole life. This like 20 minutes is probably like 12% of their life or whatever. So this just seems like a massive opportunity to further research this and make a therapy that would vastly I wonder if you gave this to people in space, if that would do anything. Because it's the same thing as being in a cast.
I mean, you could have genetic interventions that make you much stronger. Yeah. People,
Yeah.
what you're saying is absolutely right in general, that it's really unexplored. People are only doing interventions and therapeutics that work with the body. If someone comes in, this is what I'm trying to do, come in and tries to develop therapeutics that work against the body, I think it will be incredibly successful.
Mm.
Yeah, and part of the reason I'm having this conference is to promote this idea, trying to encourage people to go down that path. Yeah, people outside of biology don't even know that no one's doing this.
Yeah. Definitely see if we can get some VCs or something to go to the conference. Let them because they always they always want to find like the early stuff before no one else. That's like their big thing. They like the early deal flow. So if you could set up some type of like like pitch thing or something, I bet you could get some of the money there too, which then gets more people as well. Gets more resources.
I would love that. Industry tends to be even more risk averse than academia. It's easier to get someone in academia to look into some hypothesis than in industry. But, maybe, from my limited experience. But I think it's a good idea if you can try and if you think you can get that to work.
Yeah. Well, this episode will go up next week. So anyone who's excited for that, and if your name's Sebastian, in particular, you're going to get an email from me about this. So.
Yeah, and if anyone, you can contact me, and I'd love to, work with anyone who's willing to explore this hypothesis that aging is active self-destruction, and we should develop therapeutics that break things down and interfere with things and target the body's biological clock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I have one or two more examples, and this is just an example of heterochronic parabiosis. I'm sure you know that if you connect the circulatory system of old mice with young mice, the old mice live much longer than the old mice that are connected with old mice. And the young mice live much shorter than the young mice that are connected with young mice. So there's something in young blood that makes the old organism young, and there's something in old blood that makes the young organism old. So it's a clear example that the body has the ability to be young, but it's choosing not to unless it receives external signals, pro-aging or anti-aging signals. But it always had that ability. So this is probably the second most successful strategy for lifespan extension: young blood transfusions. And again, caloric. Yep.
Caloric restriction.
Caloric restriction, young blood transfusions, these all work by interfering with active pathways. The weight of scientific evidence is the body's not trying its best to survive.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with nanotics with Lou Hawthorne, who's on the show. But it's basically like these little nanots that you basically just release into the body, and they're the structure of the nanot has the stuff in your body that they want will bind to it, and then your body just kind of filters it out, and then because that difference in pressure or whatever, like even leaches stuff out of the tissue. It seems like if you could figure out the chemicals or whatever that's causing this stuff, like something like his technology tailored to latch on to those chemicals would be a great marriage of ideas.
I agree. Yeah, we find out how the cells know how old it is, then we have something to target. Yeah, there's so many ways we can start targeting things. Yeah, a lot of great work is being done. I just think, if we can get people to change their mindset and start looking for ways to trick the body into thinking it's younger, we can develop such great therapeutics.
Do you have, and maybe that's the next slide, but for Aubrey De Grey, it's like the hallmarks of aging, which then he bottled and made into SENS, and now it's Lev. Do you have that's like the hallmarks of body hating yourself or whatever would be like a fun way of saying it, where then you could like translate that into a nonprofit that then could garner funding to then develop out research and therapies like what SENS is doing. Basically, you'd be like the anti-SENS.
I would like to make something like that for like the clock, right?
Yeah.
All evidence that, the clock, what evidence that the clock is on a tissue level, what evidence that it's on the cellular level, what evidence is it in the 5' untranslated region? Maybe it's not in any genomic reason, maybe it's epigenetic. Yeah, I would love to create something like that.
Hmm. We got to hunt down the clock. People
Yeah.
are the epigenetic clocks at all something that could help you like triangulate where yours is?
I was really excited about them for a while. When I say clock, I mean not only is this keeping track of time, but the body is using it to direct its biological pathways. The CpG methylation clocks, it really, I'm not sure that the body is using that
Hmm.
to direct its biological pathways. It's just that's something that can be used that it's correlated with aging, so it can be used to measure age. But there's many things. I can make a clock in that sense based on anything.
Yeah.
So I'm less excited about that. Maybe it is. Maybe that's how the body's keeping track of time. Obviously, if the body is using something to keep track of time, we should be able to use it to age the organism. So it passes that test. But yeah, I'm not convinced that the CpG methylation clocks are how the body's keeping track of age.
Have we done any studies where you deliberately make it so that the organism doesn't sleep to see like if that affects the clock at all? I'm thinking of like a like Dead Reckoning that I read about what they do with ants to see like how they find their way back to home. Wondering if it's like the act of dreaming or like that cycle is like we're counting the days. So if you were to disrupt that, if that would have any effect.
Yeah, why do we sleep is another. It's like almost like the second biggest question. Why do we age is the biggest, of course. No one knows.
Mm,
Why do we sleep? That's another big mystery. No one really knows what sleep does. Um, it could it interfere. I mean, it's so important to organisms. Birds, most birds even sleep when they're in the air. So it's so programmed into us. Everyone has to sleep, and it doesn't benefit the individual having sleep. And one could argue that just like aging, I'm arguing is a group selected adaptation. Perhaps sleep is a group selected adaptation. Perhaps it's good for the sleep. It may be the ecosystem doesn't want any one organism to undergo constant activity because it could throw the ecosystem's balance, because throw the ecosystem out of balance.
yeah. Well, I meant
Yeah.
more in the sense of like if someone has done research on that because it might help like figure out where um the clock is centered in. Because if aging's one of the oldest things that exists and sleeping is one of the oldest things that exists, I wonder if there's something there. Because all these things, I'm assuming, like with the squirrel that knew where its time in life through the year, or with the hamster and stuff like that. I wonder if you like messed with their sleep, and you gave them a drug or something, and they couldn't sleep. If that would affect where they thought they were in the year.
I mean, it's usually, when you mess with their sleep, the organisms do not do well. I saw one paper where they did, have sleep deprivation in flies, and it extended their lifespan. So perhaps that's what you're talking about. Perhaps the mechanism by which it extended was interfering with the aging clock. I think your question is assuming that the long-term clock is just counting days or counting weeks or something like that. I guess you were assuming it's counting days, and I
Oh,
also
maybe.
do. I
Yeah.
do, but I do believe that. It's not. Again, we don't really know what the long-term clock is. It could be counting weeks. But I do think it's counting days, so perhaps we can interfere it by messing with the sleeping schedule. Perhaps that's why we sleep, because it's somehow the body needs that in order to keep track, to keep, marking the passage of the day.
Yeah.
I'm
I
open to
know that.
that.
Yeah, I know that there's like a group that has like a genetic mutation where they stop sleeping at a certain age. They die within like 30 days.
There's a group of humans.
Yeah, they'll
Hmm.
stop sleeping and they'll die in like 30 days.
Yeah, usually sleep deprivation leads to death. Um, I didn't understand. You're saying they have a mutation and they can't
Yeah,
sleep?
yeah. At a certain point in time in their cycle, it's like I think it's like 28 or something. It like switches on and they can't sleep from then on.
Oh,
I
very
think it's in Africa.
interesting.
Yeah. Do you think the clock has state?
What do you mean?
Does it remember? So like in a programming sense, like you're saving state so you can use it the next day. So like in the sense of like is it saved somewhere the age of where we are or the where we are in time anywhere in the
Yeah,
body?
I have a lot of assumptions. Yeah, one of my assumptions is that it's counting days, for example, and I also think it can be turned back. So you can turn back the clock you can tell the clock, no, actually your body is 20 years old, and it will give you the same probability of death of a 20-year-old. My last example is going to have some evidence of that.
Okay,
So
sweet.
I do think it has state in that sense that
Mm.
it some people think that even if there is a clock, you turn it back, it doesn't matter. The body for some reason lost all the ability to be young. Let's see, is that my okay? So it's my next example. So there's the
Sweet. Good
last
timing.
example is the nematodes, the C. elegans nematodes. This is the famous study where they realized. Oh, well, first of all, this is just an introduction to the Dower state. So the C. elegans is a nematode. It lives like 20 or 30 days. It goes through four larval stages. That's like its puberties. But if you put it in an adverse environment before the first larval stage, it will enter into a state of diapause, just like diapause is very similar to hibernation we were talking about before. And specifically, the state of diapause in C. elegans is called the Dower state. It's a state of inactivity. And what's remarkable is that they're only, a short-lived organism, 20 days, but they can last 20, 40 days in this state of diapause. And then if you feed them, they will exit in their dour state and they will start a normal life course. So this is a method of lifespan extension. And they actually, Cynthia Kenyon, who is head of Calico, she's famous for discovering that the gene, the Dow associated factor, DAF2, is responsible. So you can, knock out this gene and it gives you the same effects, the same lifespan extent effects of being in the Dower state. And what's really cool, this is actually a paper of Cynthia Kenyon's lab. And so every organism has different hallmarks of aging. One of the hallmarks of aging of C. elegans is fractured mitochondria. So young, healthy mitochondria form these networks. They're stained in green here. This is an adult C. elegans, but after day 10, it's an old C. elegans. And we can see that they don't have these. This is what the young mitochondria look like, and this is what the old mitochondria look like upon this staining. And now, what happens if you arrest the C. elegans in L1? Well, look, it enters into the Dower state. When it starts out the Dower state, it still has the young mitochondria. But day 15 in the Dower state, it now has the old mitochondria. So it is aging. So it's this one hallmark of aging, for example, is occurring in the Dower state. And then when you give the worm access to food, it exits the Dower state. And what happens to the mitochondria? It becomes young again. So this is my evidence for, yeah, the clock can be turned back. That it's not that damage had accumulated and the body could do nothing now that the mitochondria had fractured. It always knew how to make young and healthy mitochondrial networks. It was choosing not to, but the clock is turned back when it exits the Dower state, and then the mitochondria take on their young phenotype. So this is I was really excited about this paper, Rowe et al. From Cynthia Kenyon's lab in 2016, and it shows evidence that we can turn back the clock and be young.
Mm.
And that's it. So I hope to convince people to focus on aging research, that death is not inevitable, and that in our lifetimes we can figure out how the clock works and how to turn it back. And we have this conference, which more information can be found on curing-aging.com. It's really about promoting aging research, but particularly about the theory of programmed aging, that aging was selected for by evolution. Your body's not trying its best to survive. Your body has a clock, and this clock is a clear target for therapeutics. Yep, I
Yeah.
have a conference and a YouTube channel. So yeah,
Yes,
thank
those
you
will be in the
for
show notes.
listening. All right, thank you.
If you say thank you like that, they're gonna assume they can sign off. Look, we have like
Oh.
we have more time. When people hear that, they think, okay, I'm ending the conversation.
Well, this that ended stage 1 of the interview.
Yeah, well, it's just like if you say that, I can see where the retention is, and when I've done that in the past, this is the little thing, and then when you do that, they do this. They do this. Yeah, it's like because it's like one of those things like, oh, they're finishing. But
it's a natural stopping cue. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, it's good to give people a natural stopping point.
Yes. No worries. Is there anything that is in the wild or in any of the other aging research that when you see it makes you think it like almost makes a counterpoint to what you're trying to say with your hypothesis? Is like a steelman argument to why your hypothesis isn't on the right track? Anything out there?
Yeah. The fact that no one has ever found a clock, or no one has ever found any mechanisms of group selection, I think is the most powerful argument that none exists.
Yeah, I think you made a good case though for the clock. I could see the clock.
Oh, yeah, I think so too. Why hasn't anyone found it?
Yeah, you'll be the one. You'll be the clock hunter.
I feel the same way. I'm an optimist. I think, I've talked, I used to work at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and they have one of the top circadian people. Actually, here at Northwestern, we also have a lot of circadian labs. And I talk to these people and I say, can we use these methods you've developed for, detecting circadian oscillations for long-term clocks? For what happens when you try that? They look at me like I'm crazy. Saying, of course, there's no long-term clock. They're not even trying. So, I really think I have to be the one, or I'm trying to encourage people to at least try to look for it. But, the longer you try to look for something and you don't find it, the more you think it doesn't exist. So, yeah, that's the best evidence, is that there is no evidence that there's no hard evidence that there is a clock.
Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like the periodic table. For the longest time, like we knew there were other elements based on what we knew about the other elements, and so I think there's something there in what you're saying, where like the squirrels can keep track of the time of the year, even if you kind of normalize the environment and stuff like that, where it does suggest like something's weird there. You've convinced me.
Oh,
you got one. I believe there's something here, in terms of like, yeah.
The circadian oscillator is pretty new too. We didn't discover the circadian oscillator till I don't know when, the 60s, 70s, so we knew. It's funny, I don't even know the history, but I don't know if it was controversial, but clearly the cells know what time of day it is. Again, you feed the mice lethal dosage of Tylenol, it's like twice as much, I forget whether day or night, clearly the body knows what time of day it is, and it's directing its pathways that can lead to death. But we didn't discover how the body actually knew what time of day it was until very recently.
Yeah. And a comment on sleep, the dolphins, they turn off half their brain. They don't ever stop. They turn off half their brain, because if they go completely to sleep, they'll drown. Yeah. So
they need to come up to breathe, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So like what they do is like one of their hemispheres will like take a nap, and then the next day then the other hemisphere will take a nap.
Nice.
So they still need sleep, but they found a way around, the problem of being like hunted or whatever.
And a big mystery, why do they need sleep? Yeah, no one knows.
Yeah. It would be funny if that's the thing. If your hypothesis is true, looking at like the current model of like there has to be some other cool effects to develop a theory, a therapy of what have you around it. What do you think you could target with this type of IP being developed? Do you think like you could like do cancer interventions? Like where do you think it could go in that way?
Yeah, I mean everything. Yeah, we would look at cancer as just a symptom of aging. So yeah, it would be any age-related condition. If we turn back the clock, your 80-year-old body will have the same probability of cancer as your 20-year-old body. So it targets everything.
Would you be able to unwind if you have cancer? Would unwinding the clock would make it better for you to fight it?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, you could argue that a 20-year-old has precancerous cells and the body just clears it. So once the body thinks it's 20 years old, it will clear the cancer, hopefully. I don't think the damage has been done. Again, I look at an old body and I see a body that's functioning very well. It's just trying to destroy itself. And I'm going to stop that.
Yeah. Do this is kind of a morbid thought, but since you said the children's hospital, I'm trying to find a children's hospital in Chicago to like volunteer at, but unrelated.
Lori Children's, right next to me, is Lori Children's. Great hospital.
Oh, really? Oh, sweet. It's like, well, the thing is, what I need to do, because a lot of people are like, well, just go to the nearest one. I have to go through their tax returns. I have to like look to make sure that they're being responsible with the kids, because a lot of people, like the breast cancer awareness, like the NFL does, that like wear a pink ribbon. 99% of it does not go towards cancer research. 99% of an initiative to raise money for cancer research does not go to cancer research. So like when I look into a place, I have to like go through all their stuff to make sure that what they're doing is like the largest amount possible towards what they're actually meant to be doing, versus like pocketing in it to like larger higher ups and stuff like that. SENS is really good on this. Lisa put me on this, but like SENS is really good in terms of like not squandering the resources and putting it towards what they're trying to do. But it really bothers me now that there are lots of organizations like that. So I have to go through. But if you say that one's good, I'll put that one to the top.
Yeah, I mean, Lori Children's, it's a for-profit hospital, right? They're not a charity. But there are organizations that, look at how much charities actually give towards their causes versus how much they use for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you are there other people? No, the question was going to be, the morbid question was, are kids better able to fight off cancers than adults?
Yes.
Oh, that's good. It hurts my heart to know that they suffer. It's just like, like it's really terrible, like to know that, but
kids fight off everything better, basically.
That's good. Yeah.
Medicine's divided into doctors that treat children and doctors that treat adults. Mm-hmm. So they, even on some level, the physicians agree with me. I think, well, why? It's always interesting how fields divide themselves. Why did physicians decide to divide themselves like that? I think it's a good division, and it makes sense because, in my opinion, the bodies of young people are trying their best to survive, whereas the bodies of old people are not. They wouldn't agree with that, but they still have divided themselves that way.
I wonder why. That's interesting. But there's another conference we were talking about before the call involving your research on, which is what your PhD is in right now. And so if you could just like set that up, and then I want to like jump to like the cool thing that we were talking about before the call.
Yeah, so I do, my passion is aging research, but I also do tensor decomposition. So a matrix is a two-dimensional array of numbers, rows, and columns. And people that take maybe just the first course of linear algebra, they usually learn that row rank equals column rank, which is to say the number of non-redundant rows is always equal to the number of non-redundant columns of a matrix. And I can explain that to you if you want, but what it shows you is that there's fundamental relationships between rows and columns of a matrix. And that information is fundamentally lost. You take a matrix and you unfold it into a vector, you lose all that information. You lose the rank, you lose the eigenvalues. In the same way, if your data is multidimensional, let's say it has rows, columns, and pillars, if you unfold that into a matrix, which is what most computational biology algorithms are doing, you're fundamentally losing information. That's why I'm developing a non-negative tensor decomposition model for multi-omics data integration.
You were saying that at the conference, you're like a rebel, and that like people weren't. I don't want to like put words in your mouth, but they weren't like enthusiastic with what you were saying.
Yeah, they seemed interested. They just didn't understand. Yeah, they didn't understand. Yeah. Everyone's just so used to matrices, they never realized that there was another option.
Mm-hmm. So what's the implications of what you're researching?
Yeah, well, potentially, I'm trying to use this to find the clock, but potentially anything can be optimized. If you're losing information when you unfold your tensors into matrices, so, all these computational biology algorithms can be optimized if they don't do that, if they just decompose the tensor as a unit rather than as a collection of matrices.
Is it like a resource issue? Like using your model, is it because it sounds like you're not losing information, so there'd be more to like you'd have to like run energy and like do stuff on. It's like it like cost like slightly more, but be more accurate is what I'm guessing.
Yeah, so I guess I have like contrarian views in everything. I don't know why, but people love, m- measuring the complexity of algorithms. I was trying to tell them at the conference that this is, they had whole talks on here's my algorithm and why should you use it, and they say, oh, I calculated the complexity and it's this complexity class. And I say, hey, look, we have a data set and we're running this algorithm once. Does it really make sense to even consider yourself with the complexity of the algorithm? I mean, if you're only running something once, why are we even spending so much time and resources trying to optimize it? I have an algorithm that works. I'll do it. I'll put my data in, I run the algorithm, and we get the answer, right? Isn't that good? And they will reject algorithms. They say, no, that's going to take too long to run. Okay, I mean, it doesn't make sense to worry about complexity when you're designing algorithms that are only meant to be run once, in my opinion, right? That's not crazy, but everyone's worried about matrices are really fast. Yeah, so tensors will never be as fast as matrices. That is a fact, but so like, when you do a Google search, it's a matrix operation. I'm not saying make that a tensor operation. I understand, if you have to do something over and over again, it doesn't make sense to use tensors. But if you're only doing it once, it really, there's no reason to not use tensors, in my opinion.
Can you give an example of it in use and like what the difference would be? So like the Google thing, I can that makes sense to me. I can visualize that. So then what would it be like to use what you're doing?
So right now, I called A/B compartments in cells, for example. So you have each of your cell has a nucleus, and your nucleus is the largest organelle that contains all your DNA, and your DNA is organized in chromosomes, and your chromosomes. So each of the chromosomes is its own territory. Your chromosome 9 up here, and it's all together, and chromosome 7's over here, and it's all together. And the other chromosome 7 is also all together, but it's usually somewhere else. So they're not necessarily next to each other, but each of the chromosomes itself is divided into two compartments, the A compartment and the B compartment. And it's very important. The three-dimensional structure of the chromosomes are very important for the expression and how of the genes and how the cell works. We can call cancer. We can determine if this cell is cancerous by looking at the three-dimensional structure. So one important thing to determine is the AB compartment of the chromosome. So you can use this using the tensor method, for example. But right now, all the matrix methods to call AB compartments in single cells don't work. So the matrix methods that input single cell Hi-C data don't work to call AB compartments, in my opinion. I'll say that. I mean, everyone says that the matrix methods to call single cell AB compartments don't work. So you need tensor methods is a good example where you lose that information if the Hi-C data is naturally a matrix. It's two-dimensional. The matrix Aij represents the interaction of genomic bin I with genomic bin J. And then you got that matrix for every cell, right? So that's naturally a hypermatrix, three-dimensional. So this is naturally three-dimensional information, and maybe even four-dimensional, because that's one chromosome, and you can organize it chromosome-wise, and so that the fourth dimension will be different chromosomes. You can do another dimension, different time points, and all this adds insights on what actually the AB compartment is, and I'm able to figure out what to call those compartments with tensors, and you can't do it with matrices.
I think I follow you. I just realized I had a question I wanted to ask. Actually, we're coming to the end. Are you good if we go over a few minutes, or are you like hard stop in 2 minutes?
No, that's fine.
Okay, good. I always like to be respectful because I've interrupted you like 3 times today. So like, if you were Lisa from SENS said that each of the different strains of research they have going on to get it from the fact kind of like where we're talking to the point where they can translate it to IP into something that could become a therapy is about like $1 million. If I were to give you unlimited money, then you could do whatever you want. But like, how much money would it take for you to get like a similar parallel to find the clock. Kind of like the Human Genome Project for what you're doing is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. No one's looking for it except me. So there's a lot of smart people. I only switched to biology, less than 2 years ago. So there's a lot of people that have done this their entire lives, and they're very good computational biologists. They're very good at analyzing biological data sets. Just to, motivate them to work on this problem, find a clock. First of all, to get around them, they'll just laugh and say there is no clock. I don't know how to get around that problem. We just have
I think you made a good argument. What, in my opinion, so if anyone fights you on this, we'll have them on. We'll have a gentleman's debate, or yeah, we'll have a nice debate about it.
That. Well, they're going to say you found no evidence for a long-term clock, and I mean that's going to be their argument. That's always what they tell me. And I say, well, until we find evidence, no, I'm the only one looking, I guess is what I say. But I'm happy to discuss it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me, once again, I'm not a PhD scientist, but there's enough of what you've said where it's like, it feels like something could be there. Where it's like, sure, you haven't found it, but that's like anything in innovation or science. Like, by that logic, that we never would have found the Americas or, like, split the atom or anything, because it was never done before then. So it's kind of like, it's very like weak. It's kind of like a weak, thing to say. So we never found it. It's like, okay, but it doesn't mean much.
Argument by lack of imagination. Yeah, that's what I say. They come after me, they say, they call it magical thinking. You say, just because you want there to be a clock doesn't mean there is a clock. And it is right. I mean, people do believe in things without evidence, and they, waste their whole lives on a research program because they want to believe something. So I get that. I understand why they're skeptical, but they're also they're much more, adverse to the idea than I think is reasonable. As you said, we don't have, just until you find evidence for it, you don't have evidence for it. And they acknowledge, that no one's looking for it. They know that.
Well, I mean, you do have evidence for clocks. You have more than what you showed in our conversation. So there's still, do you have evidence for like the lifespan clock? Not yet. But you do have parts of the lifespan. Yeah.
That's longer than a year. That's what they'll object to. They'll say, give me evidence that there's a clock longer than a year. And I think say puberty and I think aging, but they don't think those are governed by long-term clocks.
Yeah. I don't know. That seems like a pretty shallow thinking, in my opinion. And maybe someone listening could like point out where I'm wrong and what I'm saying. But it seems to me it's like I don't know. It just feels like if you already have a day, you have a month, you have a year, you have seasons when it's normalized, and then you have like some of these larger things, propagated in there, like puberty, not menstrual cycle, kind of, I guess, maybe, but the
breeding
menopause.
cycles, menopause,
yeah. All these are on stages. There's something there, like something's keeping the score. I mean, there's even like books like the body keeps the score. So I don't think that their argument, it doesn't really seem to hold that much. So anyone listening in, like, please, like, say like where you think there's a compelling argument as to why David's wrong today, and we will fight you in the comments, because I think you're onto something. But in terms of there's like this thing called the Mythical Man Month, where it's like more people doesn't mean like more things get done. So if you could like assemble like the A team of skills, and I will tell you now, one of the biggest comments I get is like, where can I help out? So like there might be someone listening with a skill set that could help out. So like who would be like the A team of skills that you need to like further hunt this clock?
Yeah, so I'm training to be a computational biologist. My background is in math. I think that, I obviously, know how to work with someone of the same background, but, experimental people that are better able to get time resolved data. So in order to detect the clock, we need time resolved data. So a lot of data sets are not keeping track of the time. So that would be great to get experimental people and just people to help analyze the data, even, computational people to help analyze the data. Yeah. I would please reach out to me if you're interested in working on this problem. Yeah. I would love to develop the A team to find the clock. That's actually one of the reasons I'm doing this conference, to try to get together all the people that are interested in this idea of the body destroying itself by a biological clock together.
And I think that there's opportunities here as well for people who aren't technical. You know, in the conference, for instance, maybe they're helping reach out to people, contact donors, set up chairs, anything. Like it sounds like there's, even if you can't get on the hard research side, there's other ways to support you in what you're doing and support what you're like the mission that you're going for as well, I think.
I agree, 100%. Yeah, conference is not just for scientists. I'm trying to make it for everyone.
Yeah, and then do you intend, this is kind of like a meta question, but do you intend to stay in Chicago? Are you loving it? Like, you have the conference, you have Northwestern, of course, you have the nice children's hospital right across the road. Are you going to stay in Chicago and build out this center for yourself of the future, or how do you see yourself going?
Yes, actually, last year the conference was in Cincinnati because I happen to be in
Mm.
Cincinnati. My lab moved to Chicago, I guess 7 months ago. So I moved to Chicago, and I was at Indianapolis before that. So the conference was in Indianapolis. This is the third iteration of Curing Aging Conference. Yeah, I mean, I'm a postdoc, so one of the hard things about being a postdoc is that I don't really get to choose where I live. I really like the lab I'm working in, so I hope to be in Chicago for another couple of years, but the postdocs don't last, more than that, I think. So wherever I go next, I think the conference, hopefully, will, keep the conference going if there's enough participation, and I guess it might follow me.
Yeah. Well, I do know Lisa's looking for places in the Midwest to set up a center
Oh,
for
nice.
SENS. Yeah, so maybe you could be like the counter center because they do need a person who knows like the lab space around there. So maybe like the Northwestern could be a good partner, and you could bring them in, or other people like them in, and then you can kind of like maybe work on like a third party thing when you're done with your postdoc, where that's just your full time lab.
That would be great. Yeah, SENS is doing great work in promoting this idea that aging is a disease and that we should prioritize finding a cure. Yeah, I would love to work with the SENS people. I would love to try to convince them that they should be looking for a clock.
Great. All right, so you're Chicago agnostic, though I recently learned that Illinois is one of like 5 states that has an economy over $1 trillion. That's so cool. I did not know that. That is a lot of money.
Chicago's a great place to live. Yeah, I'm happy here.
Yeah. And you have Go near you, which is a unique factor. Is there so the big thing other than just hearing about what you're up to today is who should we be looking at that people don't normally get to pay attention to? Are there people in Chicago, Northwestern? I mean, you mentioned the Children's Hospital, which I didn't know before then, so it's like kind of cool. Are there other great people that you know that are doing great work that would people could learn more about? And I'll maybe like put them in the show notes.
Yeah, Peter Litsky, who was also on your show, he has this pathogen control hypothesis. Yeah, he should be looking for a clock more. He's a virologist. Yeah, he's a very great researcher. Yeah, there's actually not too many people looking who believe in programmed aging. Oh, Greg Fay, he's regrowing the thymus. He's also speaking at the Curing Aging Conference on June 22nd. So yeah, anyone who's speaking at the conference is at least open to it. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not too many people looking for a clock. Yeah, I wish I had more people to recommend.
Is he have inner his company Greg Fay FHAY FHAY. I'm dyslexic, so that's hard to read for some reason.
Yeah, no, it's Fay he. Oh, it's pronounced Fay, but it's spelled. How is it spelled? If you type in curing, let me type in curing aging. It's on my website.
Well, is he of Intervene Immune?
Intervene. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, I was just emailing the other day. I'm
Oh,
trying to coordinate for like a podcast episode, but I think I'm gonna like not respond to this email with his and just see him at the conference and see. Just like Bazinga, we can do it right now.
yeah. He's a very nice guy. He's actually probably one of the most prominent and successful people I know that believe in programmed aging.
Hmm. And then uh, any book recommendations? Doesn't have to be
Uh,
about what Could be just like fun things you're up to.
Cracking the Aging Code by Josh Middledorf. That's what introduced me to the aging field, so that's a great one. Yeah, can't think of anything else right now.
No worries. All right. Well, thank you, David, for coming on the show and getting us excited for this new way of thinking about aging. I can see the implications of your work just being very vast. So I'm very excited to see. Hopefully, you get the funding or whatever you need so you can just full time this.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been great.